Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Liz, for having me here, and I'm very excited to talk with you guys again. As Liz mentioned, I've been here over the last, 7 years, and I think one thing that's really important in terms of the time that we're at, and Alon touched on this in his talk, is just that idea of experimentation. And a lot of what I'm going to share over these next 25 minutes or so is about that. It's about experimentation. And I really do believe that creativity rests at the edge of failure, and I'm always very much trying to push at the edges of things. I'm a storyteller first and foremost, and to me what's exciting is, the story is the same. It's actually the telling that's changing, as we've been talking about. But the one thing I wanted to focus on today, because I'm really interested in the idea of process, what does it take to actually collaborate with large teams? How do you work across silos? How do you work with different types of collaborators with different skill sets? And so I've become very interested in this idea of a 21st century writer's room. I teach at Columbia University, and we're building a digital storytelling lab there. And one of the fundamental things that we're looking at is how people can tell stories that are more pervasive, connected, more relevant, but most importantly, how can you get to a sense of empathy using technology? And so one of the things that I've found that it's very, very challenging with these types of work is that the balance between story development and tech development, interactive development, software development, it couldn't be any further apart. In fact, they're often very much like knocking into each other. And it's very difficult, even if you're working and developing software and you're trying to work in an agile method. Story development, at least the way that I like to do stories, is a very kind of organic process. I want to try to find the truth in what I'm trying to do. I want to drill down into it. I want to get to the emotional core of what it is. And so the biggest challenge that I have been facing and struggling with in my own work is just that balance between those two things. A lot of times it's the timing that you're going through, like the development cycles. And so one of the things that's really critical is kind of looking at, and when I attack these projects, I'm always kind of looking and thinking about how I can harness not only the storytelling, but like the technology, the game mechanics, the design science around it, and the collaboration. I'm trying to get everybody, as much as I can, all the stakeholders who are involved in the project together at the same time. And we'll kick off a lot of projects that we're working on with immersive-based labs. So we'll bring all the stakeholders together for anywhere from a day to a week, as much time as we can get. And we'll come together and we'll kind of look at and shake what the idea is. And we'll try to work towards a design question for the project. And a design question, as an example, is something that we will use as a filter all the way through the process. So a lot of the times, it's very hard to get to that question, and it's hard to get all the stakeholders in line with that question. But the creative teams that I'm working with these days I'm still working with my production designers, I'm still working with my DP, I'm still working with all my keys that I work with in film and television. But I'm also, not only myself and the other writers I work with, but creative technologists are coming in. And, in a lot of ways, the creative technologists are kind of like a DP for me. I'm looking at interaction design, I'm looking at UX, I'm looking at how I'm building these interfaces. And data scientists have become a part of this conversation. And you guys had heard from Clint earlier. We work a lot with the Harmony Institute at looking at how we can measure social impact in the stories we tell. But having worked closely with Clint on a couple different projects, it's an amazing collaborative bouncing back and forth, when you start to think about data in creative ways. And then researchers, which is not too dissimilar to a normal, process. But I think the one thing that roots it all is just this idea of questions. We kind of come into it with a lot of questions. And there's an exercise that we'll run, which is called 5 times why. And it's really simple. We'll start with a why question, and we'll ask that question 5 times. And we'll go through it, and we'll ask the same question over again, and over again, and over again, and ask why. And what's interesting is you watch it, as you do it, it filters itself down, and you get to the core of why you're trying to do something. But the one thing that is also really important with the work is being able to get your hands on it, being able to kind of put it into a local environment. So a lot of times we'll start with something locally, and I'll give you an example in a minute. But we try to make it as tactile as we can. And a lot of times we'll play test things and we'll paper test things. And every time, the first time that you're doing it, it sucks, and then you just refine it. And I do this all the time with my students. Like, I'll bring something in the class that's purposely broken, and I know that it doesn't work, but I'll watch as they kind of work to figure it out, and the ideas that they come up with always blow me away. But I think it's because you move away from just talking about something to actually putting your hands on it, trying it, and seeing if it works. So that kind of rapid prototyping, which I borrow from like software development, I bring into this idea of test and breaking things. Can I put it in front of people? Can I get them to try it? Can I get them to break it? Can I see where it breaks, and can I learn from that? But this next slide, I swear, is the most difficult thing that I face with this work, is just simplicity. It's really easy to design something that has 3 buttons. It's next to impossible to design something that has 1. And this kind of work just requires so much effort in terms of trying to create the language for it, the grammar for it, to get people engaged. There's all these, it's fragmentation out to no ends in terms of trying to get people into what it is. But the one thing that we kind of work towards is this idea of trying to find the emotional core to what we're telling. What is the emotional core of the story? And in a lot of ways, we kind of look at it, and sometimes we'll map off of a hero's journey. Anybody that's not familiar with Joseph Campbell, he went back and tracked, I guess, over like 1,000 different stories over thousands of years, and kind of looked at these traits and found that they were similar across all these stories. So, in this next particular example is a hero's journey. This is Leica's adventure. It's a project that was inspired, and I stood here on the stage maybe about 2 years ago, right before we were going to initiate the project. We were going to go out on a 10-day trial with it, and I'm going to share with you the results of that. But Leica's adventure was inspired by a simple action, seeing my mom and my son interact after like Sunday dinner, where my mom would be teaching my son how to read, and now he can read. Actually, right before I came here, he read to me for the first time, so that was really cool. So, and effectively my mom learning how to use the tablet from my son. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool cross-generational learning opportunity. And so Leica's adventure centers on a female scientist. She's a robot from another planet, and her planet's been decimated by climate, and she was born with the largest heart for some unknown reason, which you kind of figure out as you go through the story. But effectively, her planet's been decimated by climate, and she's come to Earth in hopes of being able to find things here on this planet that might be able to save her own. And so what we did over a 10-day period, which happened literally after I was here in 2011, we took Leica out on the road, and she was powered by the imagination of students. So we worked with 2 classrooms, one 5th grade class in Montreal, French-speaking, and one 5th grade class in Los Angeles, English-speaking. And together they used their curriculum and their imaginations to propel her across North America. That project itself yielded a really interesting result. Like in 10 days, she traveled over 2,000 miles to 56 different locations. It's spread out to 8 different countries, and we had over 700 student submissions in that 10-day period, all kind of anchored around one connected toy. Because as Leica traveled, she had sensor technology in her, so she would push back the geolocation of where she was. She would share air quality and temperature, and she would push all that back to the students. One thing that was amazing about the project was that for the students, the fact that she was really living in the real world, or that she was in the real world, was such a big deal to them. They would come into the classroom incredibly excited to know where she was, what she had done. And for a lot of these kids who would never leave the neighborhood, they started to ask about these crazy places that they had never heard of before. And they started to want to travel because of what Leica was doing. And at the close of that beta, you can see her there, that's her 90,000 feet above Earth. The kids worked with the University of Maryland to build a rig with weather balloons, and they sent Leica up 90,000 feet above Earth with a camera, and they shot it. And it took about an hour and a half for her to climb to that height, and about 30 minutes for her to fall back down, and about 2.5 to 3 hours for us to find her in a cow pasture. And so the one thing that was really powerful about this project, I should note that the project was supported by the Tribeca Film Institute, so Ingrid, thank you for that. And effectively, the project is an experiential education project. So the more that the children could live in that world, the more that they actually became those formerly known as the audience and were effectively collaborators in what we were doing, the more exciting it became, and we started to build out these really interesting kind of like adventure labs where we would go into these spaces with these kids, and the idea being that we would bring in physical computing and game design and storytelling and design thinking, and we would bring them into areas and we would interact with children and have them work through collaborative problem solving. So they'd be given the task of like Leica's stuck here, she needs your help, tell her about where you live, tell her about where you think she should go, what do you think her planet looked like before it was decimated, you know, what do you think it could look like again? And so a lot of very interesting design thinking applications for the kids. I ran yesterday with, in the south of London with 30 6-year-olds. I ran a workshop, a lab with them yesterday, and which was in conjunction with the London Film Festival. Here, it's a little out of focus, but here they had laid out a piece of paper and they worked through the ecosystem of London. And they worked with these little bee bots, which are programmable robots. And they moved the robots all the way through the ecosystem, and they kind of imagined what the bees would do and the relationship to the bees and the relationship to them and the interconnectedness, basically, of the ecosystem that they live in. And then they created a variety of different things that they thought were on Leica's planet and what Leica actually consumed. And then they created other characters that were on Leica's planet as well. And then we did a little group photo. And so Leica, you know, it's this whole beautiful world that's kind of created around this idea of this robot. And as we go forward, we're doing an interesting, this project was birthed from a hackathon, and then went on to do the collaborative beta test that I mentioned to you. And it will launch next spring of next year as a series of books from Penguin. So we're doing 8 different books with Leica, and we've been building a really cool second screen reading experience that goes into Leica's heart. And so kids can actually sync to the book, print or ebook as they read, and that's Leica and one of her little friends. And effectively, we're working to kind of change the way that kids are able to think about designing the world around them and opening it up and being more participatory. So in a certain sense, the children that we collaborate with are in this 21st century writer's room with us in a certain respect. So Leica had a journey. I always just kind of love this mapping of characters in various films. I really like the primer one down here that's a bit of chaos, and 12 Angry Men, which is totally linear. But a lot of the times I'm kind of working and thinking about, you know, how I can place the audience into the shoes of a protagonist, you know, and what does that mean? And in a lot of ways, I mean it not to be like literal, but how can that experience be shared? How can I make it immersive? How can I make it exciting for somebody to be in it? And the one thing that I've kind of walked away with that I think has been really kind of amazing is the more that I kind of play with themes, the more I am able to extend the worlds that I want to tell. Because a lot of times when you're kind of working, maybe you don't necessarily want the characters to be changed. Maybe you don't want the plot to be kind of taken in a different direction. And what I found is the more that I kind of play off of themes, the easier it is for people to collaborate with me. The next project is an example of that. And I'm going to share, I think I'll probably go to the trailer first to let him set it up. So give me one moment here and I will play the trailer for you.
Hi, I'm David Cronenberg. I'm very excited to partner with Body Mind Change and contribute to its groundbreaking pod recommendation engine. The promise of pod is nothing less than extraordinary. It represents an unprecedented leap forward in human improvement technology. placing humanity at the threshold of a new evolutionary age. Physical and intellectual symbiosis with Pod will improve your life in unexpected ways. Through a process called synaptic entanglement, Pod's personality integrates with your own, a truly unique life form. Pod helps you pursue a smarter, more purposeful life. It turns you on to new tastes and experiences. Life is now an adventure, and Pod is your partner. Join us as we make history together. Visit the Body Mind Change website. It's your first step in becoming a very special premier host for Pod. The best candidates may receive their own Pod recommendation engine from Body Mind Change.
Okay, so this project with, I was contacted by TIFF and the CFC to work on this project, which effectively is the connective tissue around an exhibition that's going to be released that is a retrospective of David's work and a touring component that involves a number of different props and different things from his films. And I was tasked with creating a connective tissue between those things. And David wanted something that would extend what it was like to be in the world of a David Cronenberg film. And so with that challenge, I was given the opportunity to have creative license to kind of go across what his work was. And there's such an expansive amount of films that he's done. And one of the first things that we had started with was kind of breaking it out into themes, these ideas of, who am I, who is my creator, who are my friends and family, and then kind of mapping across all of David's work, having various motifs. There was an arc for the player within it, effectively what Pod's arc was within the story, and then kind of mapping against Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But the one thing in the story of this was around this idea, and I came up with this thought of, well, what if David took the science and technology from his films, the intellectual property from his movies, and what if he licensed them to a biotech startup? And that biotech startup used them as the foundation for a next generation of biotech implants with the intention of evolving humanity, right? And so that's where Pod came into play. And so Pod, basically, what happens is when you go through this, it's a three simulations that you kind of make your way through. It has a data gen component to it. So as you go through the decisions and what you do within the experience are actually rendering a physical narrative object in the museum space. So basically what that means is your decisions are printing out something that's personalized to you, your own Pod, that's based on the decisions that you made within the experience. So it creates a physical object based upon your interactions. And so the idea being that over the course of play, there'll be a creation, every player that steps into it will shape a narrative element. And I think what's exciting about that aspect is this idea of where we are right now with the idea in terms of the Internet of Things, this connected realm that we live in, where everything from cars to appliances to houses will be connected by networks. And that, as a storyteller, leaves a really interesting layer. So in something like this, I was very interested in, can somebody go through it and can they feel something while they're playing, and then can they actually birth something at the same time? Which, if you know David Cronenberg's work, it fits right into his world. So the project makes use of a couple different elements. It has a very live and digital side, very not dissimilar to what I was talking about with Leica. In the sense that Leica has a local and a global aspect. It has a live element and a digital element to it. And so a lot of the project is really kind of centered on, most of it takes place within a browser-based experience. There's a mobile application to it. There's a fourth floor gallery that I've built out that is a whole, like if anybody knows Videodrome, a lot of the influence for what we're playing with is Videodrome. And in Videodrome, James Woods' character goes to an optics store. and it's a front for something else sinister. You have to see the movie. But effectively, we have a lab that we've set up where you can actually go into the TIFF light box in Toronto, and then later as it subsequently travels. So the thing that's fascinating about the project is this opportunity to extend it into the real world and look at these interesting ways in which we can bring audience to it and ways that we can make the storytelling impactful. So some of the things that I'm always trying to do, and when we kind of go into the writer's room scenarios, is trying to figure out, and this is a classic thing for anybody that's a screenwriter, is like show, don't tell. I would argue that most of the work in the interactive space over-explains what it is to its own detriment. I think often it leaves mystery, but I think it's important to leave mystery as well. And then I think I'm just going to end out really quickly with some things that have helped me in terms of the way that I'm working. One is I'm obsessed with the idea of questions in a lot of ways. I think the questions are more important than the answers. We're always kind of asking ourselves, what is the story about? You know, what does the story mean to you? When I went through the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, one of the things that was the most simple question, but it was the most difficult, was like, why are you telling this story? You know, and you sit there and you think, oh, well, that's an easy question, and then you start to dig deeper into it, and you start to get really into this core of why you actually want to tell it. Why does the story need to be told? And where is the story best told? And these are just some tips that I've found to be helpful. You know, be willing to let go. It's never going to be perfect anyway, so you might as well just let go and let it happen. The audience is a hive mind. They're always faster. They're always smarter. They're going to figure it out. You know, so just embrace that. Be clear and transparent in what you do. A lot of the times, I've found that the more willing you are to kind of make it known that you kind of have calls to action and let people know how they can engage with you, and be transparent about what the process is. Develop style guides. You know, we try to develop style guides across all our projects so we can make it easier as it goes from one group to the next. Keep it simple, as I said at the beginning. Subtlety often gets lost in this form. It's really hard to be subtle. So hats off to you if you can be subtle with it. Leave mystery, calculated gaps. You know, we try to leave places where we think it will be interesting to have the mystery within the experience. Make the tech transparent. God, I haven't gotten to that part yet. But the idea that it totally is transparent to the experience, you know, that it's invisible, and that it just becomes the story. Let's see, remember to make it fun. I should probably have that at the top of the list. Experiment and fail quickly, and then creativity rests at the edge of failure. And I have a couple resources really quickly. I know I'm going to be pushed off the stage. I wrote a book in Twitter. It's called Building Storyworlds. I did it as an experiment in scarcity and abundance. Wrote 140 tweets, 140 copies, and they're only available in print. And every page of the book says, please set this book free, retweet it. We do this thing called DIY Days. It's really cool. There's this other aspect called Learn, Do, Share, free books that you can download. They're really awesome. And then in an effort to do something new, we're playing with this idea of a kind of a grouping of peers coming together. So there are no talks, there are no presentations. It's just peers talking about process. And then thank you very much.